Good afternoon, welcome. Today is a special occasion. PhD student Jason Abelaneda Baguia is presenting his research proposal with the title Looking Forward, Looking Back, Journalism on Underreported Global Issues and its Use of Cultural Memory. Welcome, Professor Dora. Thank you very much for your availability and interest in participating in this discussion. Professor Nelson Ribeiro, our Dean, Jason's supervisor. Also, my greetings to audience. This is an opportunity to learn, of course. So, Jason, you have 20 minutes to present your proposal, following with the intervention of Professor Dora. Of course, Professor Nelson will have time. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is no greater agony, the poet Maya Angelou once said, than bearing an untold story inside you. Esteemed members of the scientific committee, Professor Dr. Nelson Ribeiro, Professor Dr. Dora Santos Silva, and Professor Dr. Isadora Ataide, colleagues in this doctoral program in Communication Sciences at the Universidade Católica Portuguesa, family and friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. This may very well mean that much of the world is in agony because journalists have left its stories untold and by extension forgotten. Journalistic reporting makes people's stories public for discussion and possible intervention. Conversely, silence may worsen situations and lead to collective amnesia about things that matter. These are why I have this for a doctoral project. Looking farther, looking back, journalism about underreported global issues and its use of cultural memory. Here's my agenda this afternoon. I will introduce the topic of underreported stories and collective memory, discuss the journalistic pursuit of comprehensive reporting and the role of the past in it, present multiple concepts, a model, and notions for framing my research problem, describe how I will seek answers through a multi-method research design, and reflect on the significance of this study. So let's talk about underreported news stories and collective memory. Journalism claims to present complete information about the most important current affairs, but this claim needs to be qualified. As an editor, I have screened and voted on stories in the newsroom. I would vote on which, out of the many that reporters pitch daily to me and my co-editors, would appear in next day's newspaper and in our news outfit's website. I have also cut parts of stories that are non-essential. They were deemed so given print space constraints or reading time considerations for web editions. As a reporter, there were times I broke stories exclusive to the news outfits where I worked, outscooping journalists from other organizations. Journalists do not deliberately shortchange audiences, but stories do regularly get underreported, and this problem is amplified in reporting world news. The world's vastness dwarfs the number of journalists reporting it. Few, for instance, have reported the story behind Pope Francis's kissing of the Ukrainian flag. But a movement has arisen in journalism to cover globally important underreported issues. This movement is under-researched. So is the question of how collective memory is used in it. When I edited news text, I rarely cut background. A key part of news text comes from background, and which draws from cultural or collective memory. And this is why the use of collective memory in underreported issue coverage must be interrogated. Now let me introduce the first key term in this study, journalistic underreporting. I crafted this working notion after preliminary visits to websites of relevant organizations and reading scholarly literature on crises in journalism. Journalistic underreporting refers to a perceived shortfall in the comprehensiveness or to the absence of the journalistic mediation of a story. My working definition is controversial. who perceives shortfalls in the comprehensiveness or the absence of journalistic mediation of a story. The list on your left of underreported beats comes from the organization Report for America, among those that claim to help solve the problem of journalistic underreporting. The list is also controversial. Isn't there already ample news coverage of these beats? The second key term in this study is cultural memory. Like Shudson, I use it interchangeably with collective memory, public memory, and local memory. And I do so because unlike in this illustration from a World War II Holocaust memorial website, remembering in practice is not neatly compartmentalized between personal and collective, or between collective and any other mode of remembering. This is why cultural memory may be defined as remembrance resulting from a group's multi-directional process of constructing stories, including mediated stories of the past. Journalistic reporting and underreporting are decisive in cultural memory and oblivion. Let me now try to summarize the problem. There is an apparent lack of academic and professional consensus about what is an underreported issue, and this quote card from Terry Haight of Report for America serves to illustrate. She says, "We don't specifically have criteria. We want to see newsrooms make a really good case for this is why we want to cover this beat." This amorphousness means that little is known for educational and by extension for vocational education purposes about the methods of covering underreported issues. This further means that published news about underreported issues are not easily critically examined, and that a lot of collective forgetting may be happening simply because journalistic resources are not being invested where they should be. The emergence of this new kind of journalism and the dearth of research on how collective memory figures in it led me to formulate this main research question. How do journalists who cover world news address the problem of underreporting and use cultural memory in doing so? Now, determining what to cover presupposes judging a global issue to be underreported. A glance at extant literature shows variations in defining journalistic underreporting. So a related question is question 1. How do global journalism stakeholders define underreported news stories? Once terms are clarified, it becomes easier to examine the process of news coverage. And this is the purpose of question 2. How do journalists who cover world news address underreporting? Now, I'm concerned with the comprehensiveness of stories, both as stories and as a series of reports. Comprehensiveness depends on background, which in usual or mainstream journalism draws from collective memory. I therefore pose a third sub-question. How do published stories about underreported global issues engage cultural memory? So how deeply has scholarship delved into the topic of underreported issues in global journalism? Firstly, multiple studies acknowledge that underreporting happens. A plethora of related concepts have been named linked to underreporting, and some of these terms are media shadows, media black holes, news deserts. Rarely, however, do the studies explicitly frame the problem as underreporting. Secondly, scholars have so far not really discussed how underreported global issues are covered. One study explores which types of news are underreported in Scandinavia. Another contrasts mainstream and other reporting in terms of their comprehensiveness in covering disasters in some African and Asian countries. And still another study documents how a legacy newspaper responded to underreporting in a hyper-local US community. And this latter study is what comes closest to what I am doing, but its scale is obviously far from global. Thirdly, collective memory and the news are clearly linked as far as well-reported news is concerned. Among the functions of collective or cultural memory in mainstream journalism, there are at least 4. Providing news with background, providing it with significance, writing contemporaneously useful lessons into the news, and giving the news future orientation. But memory's links with reporting the underreported is under study. So what's my theoretical conceptual framework in this investigation? For my first 2 sub-questions, what applies are the propaganda model of media capture, agenda setting, gatekeeping, and critical discourse theories. The notions of materiality and temporality also apply. Meanwhile, critical discourse theory applies to the third sub-question. The propaganda models, filters, media ownership, journalistic sourcing patterns, advertising, flag and dissent marginalization shape news texts and decisions on the allotment of journalism's resources. News outputs are likewise shaped and influenced by media capture when extra journalistic entities commandeer media operations. Agenda setting and gatekeeping manifest as editorial decisions on what deserves public attention and to what extent it does. But both also manifest as decisions on what is narrated and what media narratives include and exclude. Resources like time and material means influence news coverage and reportage too. Discourse, meanwhile, is responsible for qualities in the articulation or representation of news subjects. In concert, these dynamics affect what are reported and underreported, and they also influence how practitioners marshal collective memory in journalism. Now let me discuss methodology. I present clarifying questions under each research sub-question, the units of analysis that correspond to each, and the populations that the units represent. For sub-question 1, I will generate data from websites, key personnel, and reporters. They represent global news organizations, journalistic foundations, and think tanks. For the first clarifying question, I will look for data from the websites of 6 highly relevant organizations. I will also interview 2 key informants from each of the 6 organizations to understand the reasons behind underreporting. In addition, I will interview 2 journalists from each journalism foundation and each news organization to understand the mechanisms of identifying underreported issues. The source websites, key personnel, and reporters for sub-question 1 are Thomson Reuters and Pulitzer Center that fund the pursuit of underreported stories by journalists around the world, Ground Truth Project and the Orwell Foundation that do the same for reporters in the United States and the United Kingdom, and Project Censored and Pointer that are highly regarded reflexive voices in the Anglophone media ecology on journalism and media practice. Under the second sub-question, for the first clarifying question, I will interview 28 journalists, 7 from Thomson Reuters Foundation and 21 from the Pulitzer Center to find out exactly what they do to address underreporting. I will analyze the transcripts of interviews with them. Under the second clarifying question, I will analyze the text of 84 published stories, 3 from each of 7 Thomson Reuters Foundation and from each of 21 Pulitzer Center story categories. And this is projected to foreground what the published texts about underreported global issues show about how they are covered. For sub-question 3, I will analyze the text of 84 published reports on underreported global issues from Thomson Reuters and Pulitzer. I will inquire what cultural memories are tapped in covering the underreported issues, see how these stories vary or reflect mainstream news in the ways they tap collective memories and describe such use, and find out what about each issue is mediated in the language of the stories. These are the 7 categories according to Thomson Reuters and the 21 categories according to Pulitzer Center of underreported global issues. In summary, this study will take an inductive-deductive approach and use a qualitative strategy. The corpora will come from website contents, transcripts of interviews with key informants, and the text of published stories about underreported global issues. And data will be collected through online capture and key informant interviews, all conducted ethically, observing fair use of public domain content, and securing consent for identifying or anonymizing key informants, whichever is necessary. Through qualitative content analysis, starting with the text and progressing through levels of coding, I will take an inductive approach to the problem, and using critical discourse analysis, drawing from aspects of discourse for which the text may be critiqued, I will also take a deductive approach, and both QCA and CDA are expected to lead to rich results and foundations for interpreting the findings. So this is the timeline for finishing, hopefully really done on September 2024. And this is a preview of the references. Of course, I can provide you with a copy of the full proposal if you're interested. So why is this study significant? Answering the main sub and clarifying research questions will yield several benefits. For academia, advanced knowledge about how collective remembrance and collective forgetting are worked into news narratives. Within journalism and media studies, a more nuanced understanding of underreported news, bringing together perspectives internal and external to journalism, and situating them in the discussions of dominant journalism and media theories. For journalism and communication practitioners, trainers, and educators, watchdog organizations, and funders, new knowledge in the art of producing and spreading news about underreported issues, a basis for creating new reporting manuals. For audiences, reasons to reassess the position that the monolithic media is a tool of the powerful to perpetuate a woeful status quo. Comprehending the work of reporting underreported issues and the circumstances surrounding it, this study will underscore how the allotment of attention to the voiceless and maximalism in communal remembrances of the past are feats that global journalists try to achieve for the common good. Years ago, I interviewed the Grammy Award-winning band Switchfoot, and I'm always happy to share the evidence. Switchfoot to me is underreported not because they're ignored celebrity, but because for more than 10 years, they have been leading a community movement in San Diego, California to fight homelessness, starvation, physical disability, and music illiteracy among young people at risk. They organize fundraising concerts and festivals with beach surfers and other artists and use the proceeds to support other organizations that help vulnerable youths. If I were a global entertainment editor, I would encourage reporters to dig for stories of how celebrities compassionately impact struggling communities. That, given the kind of stories that are usually published about celebrities, would be a great example of fuller reportage toward richer collective remembrance. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I welcome your feedback and questions.
Thank you, Jason. Please, Professor Guerra.